Welcome to the Nonfiction Writers, podcasting in a great way. I'm Ryan Aber, joined by Jason Kersey. Jason, a lot going on this week. Looking back at what happened at Iowa State on Saturday and also looking forward to the Baylor game Saturday, 11 a.m. At Owen Field. Let's start with what happened last week, which was Trevor Knight running crazy, Samaje Perine and Alex Ross having really good games, also topping 100 yards. Trevor Knight doing some good things with his arm, despite not having Sterling Shepard for all but one play in that game. But what was the biggest thing maybe you learned about this team or that surprised you about what happened on Saturday in Ames?
I mean, I just want to know where that offense has been all year. I mean, that was great. They looked really good, and Trevor Knight seemed comfortable doing it, and it just sort of makes you wonder what was going on when they weren't calling some of those things early on. So, I mean, that was sort of the thing that stands out, I think, the most about the game. I mean, that was kind of the story of the game in many ways.
There's been a lot of talk about, well, Josh Heupel feels freer to do some of this stuff because either they've lost a couple games and they're out of the national championship hunt, or because of Cody Thomas showing in that Kansas State game in the one drive he came in on that he can perform well offensively in a crunch time, not just to garbage time situations. What do you think has been behind the shift in this offense that, at least to this point, has proven pretty productive?
Yeah, I don't know. I do think that Cody Thomas's one drive had something to do with it, although it would seem a little crazy that they would have this drastic shift in philosophy based on one drive. I mean, he came in against Iowa State and threw an interception, so in junk time. So, I don't know. I think that there's probably a lot of reasons for it, some of which we don't even know about, but it's good to see that they did it. It's good to see that Josh Heupel is at least willing to shake things up a little bit, although I'm sure there are a lot of OU fans who wish he would have done it 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I would say there's quite a few of those, but whatever it is, it's worked for now. Now, they did it against Kansas State. They played really well offensively, take away the two interceptions in that game. They played really well at Iowa State, although that's Iowa State, and their defense hasn't been fantastic to this point. But now they have Baylor coming up. Baylor's offense gets a ton of credit for what they do, and rightfully so. But Baylor's defense is pretty tough as well, aren't they?
Yeah, they're not bad. They've got some good players. I think they're a lot better than a lot of people thought they would be. But at the same time, I still don't think that they're an elite defense necessarily. I mean, I still think there will be a lot of opportunity for OU to score points. I think this will wind up being a pretty high-scoring game and might come down to a turnover or something like that. At the end of the day, I'm not picking OU to win in a blowout, but I'm going to pick them to win, and I think it'll be pretty high-scoring.
Yeah, and Jay Norvell, OU's co-offensive coordinator and wide receivers coach, talked to us earlier this week about Baylor's defense and that they sometimes it's either feast or famine. You can burn them for some big plays, but they can also create a lot of turnovers to get the ball in their offense's hands quicker.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I think that's sort of been the thing about a lot of Big 12 defenses. I would say that's sort of the same thing about OU's defense. They sometimes get burned and in the secondary, but they're also really capable of coming up with big plays, especially from the front seven. Stryker or Geno Grissom coming in and getting a sack or forcing a bad throw or something like that. So, I mean, I think that's sort of the way defense is played in the Big 12 today.
And we saw Sterling Shepard go down early in that game last week. Norvell yesterday said there's no doubt in his mind that Sterling Shepard is playing this week. But I think sometimes it gets forgotten that last year in this game, the game that turned into a blowout late in the second quarter, Sterling Shepard wasn't around for most of that thing.
Yeah, that was bad. That was when he got hit and knocked out of the game with a concussion, and he wound up having to I believe he missed the Iowa State game last year, if memory serves me correctly. So that was obviously a big loss for OU, and I don't think that they would have won the game with Sterling Shepard but I think that did make a little bit of a difference. The OU offense was completely unable to do anything that entire game, and the other thing that people forget is that they were missing Trey Millard. That was their first game without Trey Millard. He got hurt the week before, so that really put a that really caused the OU offense a lot of problems, missing those two guys.
Yeah, definitely. And Sterling Shepard did miss the Iowa State game last year in Norman. That was a week after Baylor, and that Shepard took a big hit and missed it with a concussion. But either way, if Sterling Shepard is in, if he's not, we expect him to play on Saturday. But OU is going to need plays in the passing game from other receivers. Without Sterling Shepard last week, we saw Blake Bell make a couple of nice plays, especially over the middle in the end zone, take advantage of his size there. And some other receivers make some plays, although they also had some drops. What do you think about the way the rest of the receiving corps performed against Iowa State, and what does that say for how OU plays on Saturday against Baylor?
I think that the rest of the receivers played pretty well. I mean, they had some drops, obviously. Micaiah Quick had some drops, and those are obviously going to have to be fixed. But on the whole, I think that you can sort of take away from that game that they might be okay if Sterling Shepard was unavailable this week. I think the other receivers played pretty well at times. I think Sterling Shepard obviously is the best player on the team. And so losing him makes a big difference, but at the same time, I think that those other receivers showed some signs of promise, particularly Micaiah Quick. KJ Young caught a touchdown. After I sort of didn't expect to hear from him maybe ever again, at least this season, after he got benched. So that was encouraging. Blake Bell caught 2 touchdowns. I don't think that they will be okay without Sterling Shepard, though. If he doesn't play this weekend, I think that might be catastrophic for them because of how good Baylor's defense can be and how many points Baylor's going to score.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think as much promise as we saw from those other guys, Deron Neal's another one you didn't mention that has performed pretty well this year, but they have got to have Sterling Shepard and his ability to stretch the field, make big plays. I mean, heck, right off the bat against Iowa State, he goes for more than 40 yards. That's the play he got injured on, but really their only home run hitting threat in the passing game, and they certainly need that to free some things up in their running game as well. Jason, in Tuesday's paper, I wrote about Alex Ross and his continued maturation and the consistency that we've started seeing from him the last couple weeks. Got some different answers on what people said was the reason behind that. What do you think has been the key to Alex Ross becoming more consistent where it's not, 82-yard runs and 2-yard losses all the time?
I think that a lot of that just has to do with him playing more. I mean, I think that when it's sort of natural that when you play more, you get more of a feel for it and you're able to find that space, which is what he needs. I mean, he's not a guy who's ever going to be like Samaje Perine and he can just grind out 5-yard, pickups here and there. I mean, I think that they need to get him in space, and I think that part of that is him finding the space himself, and he's doing a better job of that. But yeah, he's been really good the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I thought he did a whole lot better job at deciding when to make cuts, making those cuts, getting to the hole that he's supposed to be at quickly, which is sometimes different than just pure speed, which we know he has tons of from the big runs that he's broken off. But having an Alex Ross that can consistently make plays in the running game and consistently find space is huge for this ground game and this offense, even with Samaje Perine and when Keith Ford is healthy.
Yeah, I mean, that's, to me, going to be another big key is Keith Ford. I think that if he's healthy, he adds so much back to this offense. And again, they're going to need all the playmakers they can get against Baylor. And Keith Ford, with his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield I even didn't realize. I was looking at the stats yesterday that he only caught 6 passes in those 3 games. It seemed like more than that, though, just because of the plays that he was able to make out of the backfield. So he makes a difference too. So and maybe in the backfield now after his performance Saturday, we'll see a little more David Smith. I wouldn't mind that because we get to talk to him more.
Yeah, and speaking of, you had a really good story on David Smith in Monday's paper. David Smith is a guy who gets a lot of attention from his teammates because of one, the way he works in practice, and even if he knows he's not going to get to play much, if at all, he got his first carries against Iowa State. Always moving at 100%, no matter what the situation. And 2, just his love of OU. What's been your biggest takeaway, not only talking to David, but also with the guys that he plays with day in and day out?
I mean, it was just obvious from that touchdown was the one that got the biggest reaction on the sideline, and everybody was excited. And it's because everybody likes to see a guy like that succeed. I mean, this isn't a guy who came in and got to play much. He was always behind Brennan Calais and Roy Finch and Damian Williams. Now you have Samaje come in and take a bunch of carries. You have Alex Ross, Keith Ford. If Joe Mixon was here, he'd probably be playing. If he was part of the team right now, he'd probably be playing a lot. So I mean, he was a guy that had every reason to think about transferring. I mean, I was looking at some of the other scholarship offers he had. I mean, he had a Michigan State offer. So he had some good scholarship offers, and he chose to come to OU, and he hasn't gotten to play at all until this point. So it's neat to see a guy like that come in and take advantage of that opportunity. And I have no idea whether he'll get any more. I mean, that was in the fourth quarter of a rout, so I don't know if he'll play again this year. I think that'd be neat if he did, though.
Yeah, absolutely. It was fun to watch, and it was fun to see the way his teammates reacted to his positive performance. He finished with over 70 yards and just like you said, mop-up time. But just one of those real neat stories that seemed to happen a couple of times throughout a football season.
Yeah, I mean, and that was too. It was funny. He was having this performance, and the thought occurred to me, they need to bring him into the post game. So I went and asked, and they wound up bringing him in, and he was great. He was, he really didn't want to say all that much about himself, though. I thought that was kind of interesting, but everyone else had no problem talking about Sooner Dave.
Yeah, especially, and Dimitri Flowers had some interesting things to say about him as well. Mm-hmm. And I talked to him, and Dimitri talked about coming to his official visit during bowl preparation for the Sugar Bowl, and they're out there doing a walkthrough, and everybody else is going about 50%. But there's David Smith against the number one defense running 100%. And he said some of the defenders weren't exactly happy with that, but they also understand that that's just David Smith, and he doesn't dial it down no matter what the situation.
Yeah, even when he's not getting to play. So that's really good.
And, Jason, going to the other side of things, the defensive side, this is a defense that, gosh, it seems like it's been 10 years ago since we talked about how great we thought this defense was, but it's only been a couple months since things have changed. But they did some better things against Iowa State, and Iowa State's offense had been putting up some pretty good numbers, scored over 40 on Texas, but certainly didn't look that part on Saturday, even without some of those things that OU was doing. But what can they do moving forward, and what do you expect them to do against an offense that's as potent as what Baylor's is?
Well, I mean, I think they've got to get pressure on Bryce Petty. That's going to be the main thing. I mean, they backed off doing that some against Kansas State and TCU and Texas. I think they wanted to try and limit the mobile quarterbacks, and they were able to be more aggressive against Iowa State, and it worked. And I think that's what they're going to have to do against Baylor. You do risk some things by doing that, especially with a guy who can move a little bit like Bryce Petty can a little bit. At the same time, though, if you don't do that, and you give him too much time back there, the OU secondary just isn't good enough to stop these receivers, I don't think. And so they're going to have to do something to level the playing field there. And what they have is a very good front seven. that can put pressure and on Petty, and that's what I think they're going to have to do. That's what West Virginia did, and it worked, and they won.
So would you say a guy like Eric Stryker maybe is the key to this performance on Saturday, or is there somebody else maybe that you would put up there if you had to pick out one guy on the defensive side?
Stryker mostly, yeah, but Geno Grissom and Devontae Bond and coming off the bench and Charles Tapper and Chuka and Dulaway. I mean, all of those guys I think will be really crucial. But yeah, probably Stryker would be the one mostly, I'd say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think if Eric Stryker has a big day and is able to consistently not only get to Bryce Petty but chase him around a little bit and make him force him to be uncomfortable in making throws, and I think that's a very good sign for OU. Last thing, Jason, you wrote about this. We both touched on it some in the main event for Monday's paper, but you wrote about it. Baylor's losing streak on the road against ranked teams. Now, obviously, Baylor hasn't been that good for very long, so you understand a big chunk of that, although there were different times during that streak where they were ranked. In the early 90s, I think their last true road win against a top 25 ranked team was in 91. But even, I believe, the 92, 93 era, they were ranked a little bit. Obviously, they've been ranked recently and had some upsets, including the one in Stillwater last year. But what do you get the sense is some of the reasoning behind that, and can Baylor break through?
Well, I don't know what the reason is. I mean, I think the biggest reason is it's just hard to win on the road against ranked teams, and especially if you haven't done it. If you don't have a history of doing it, it's not easy, and I think they just got to get one. And I think once they get one, it'll be easier to get the next one. But the one that sticks out to me is last year in Stillwater. You and I were in what outside of Manhattan, Kansas, at a little bar and grill, having dinner, watching that game, and I could not believe what was happening. I mean, they just got obliterated, and I still think Baylor was a better team than OSU last year. That sounds crazy, 49-17, but I do think Baylor was a better team overall. They just got blown out. The few things didn't go their way, and they just got crushed. And to me, that was one. I remember Bryce Petty tripping on his way into the end zone and fumbling, or no, he tripped and then he fumbled, or he threw an interception. I can't remember. Maybe on the next play, but little things like that when you're on the road against a ranked team can just snowball, and I think that's what happened that night, and I think that could happen Saturday if Baylor makes any mistakes.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of the same way. I think when you're on the road, mistakes get amplified. Everything, you have to be more crisp with everything you do, and Baylor just hasn't done that. Now they've checked off virtually every other check mark on the way to building a program that you would consider a power program. They won the Big 12 championship. They've won really big games at home. They've even won some games in neutral site and bowl games, even though they struggled in the bowl game last year. But this team has done pretty much everything else except for win a big game on the road. If they win Saturday at OU, especially with what OU has done at home traditionally during the Bob Stoops era, that's a big feather in Art Briles' cap.
Yeah, definitely.
So should be a fun one Saturday, 11 a.m. at Owen Field. We'll be back later this week with the podcast where we'll be joined by John Werner of the Waco Tribune Herald. Really looking forward to that. But for now, he's Jason Kersey. I'm Ryan Aber. You can check us out every day at newsok.com and every morning in the Oklahoman for the best OU coverage anywhere.